Good afternoon. If you are on the East Coast, it is time again for the monthly Georgia Tech Supply Chain and Logistics Lunch and Learn. I'm Chris Gaffney, the Managing Director of the Supply Chain and Logistics Institute. And if this is your first time with us, welcome. If you've gotten in the habit since we started these in December, welcome back, and we will continue with this tradition the first Monday of the month at noon. And I am joined today by my colleague, Dr. Frederick Benabin, and Fred is going to take the lead on this one, a very hot topic out there in the world in terms of building resilience. And Fred is going to speak from both his applied research as well as his engagement with many large global industry partners. So this is some really new stuff. I think for our audience, it's intended to kind of stretch your thinking a little bit, but we will welcome your feedback on this. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Fred.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I hope you can hear me well. Welcome, everybody. So my name is Frederick Benabin. I'm a professor in IMT France and also adjunct / visiting professor at ISYE at Georgia Tech and in the Supply Chain and Logistics Institute. I will talk a little bit about resilience today, and I will try to give you, let's say, a theoretical and abstract vision of what resilience is so that we can have the background that also will be in line with the course that we will do in the next weeks about this topic. So that's a kind of broad vision. There will be a time for question, of course, at the end. So first, what is resilience? So there is a lot of history behind the word resilience. It comes from the Latin. It means bounce back. It's used to explain that the system can get back to its initial state or normal state after disruption. There is a meaning that is really about it came back in the 70s, really not only about mechanics and let's say materials, but also about social system and the ability of a system to adapt and cope with change while maintaining its original function and structure. What I want also to show you is that there has been an extension of this word into ecology, but also into industrial engineering, like the ability of a system to continue operating even if the event of a breakdown. And mainly in the supply chain domain, we often refer to two different types of resilience: engineering resilience, which is really a notion of time, how much time do we need to come back to an acceptable state, and the ecological resilience, which is really about the amount, the load of disruption that the system can cope with. So more visually, very traditionally, we can represent resilience using that kind of diagram where we have the time on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's the ability of the system to perform its mission, and we have an expected trajectory, that is how the system should actually improve. And once we observe the actual trajectory, and if there is a crisis or a disruption, then very traditionally, we will use the shape, the surface of this disruption, this loss of ability to define what resilience actually is as this part. We also have the idea of anti-fragility and fragility, that the ability of the system to come back to a better actual state or to a less good state. So that's a very traditional vision of resilience in industrial engineering and in social systems. Something that is interesting is also to mention that when you are at the bottom of that kind of situation, that's where the system has the most degrees of freedom, and that's where the ideas and options and measures that can be taken can be the one that will bring the system to benefit of anti-fragility or to suffer from fragility. So that's where we have more options than when we are close to the expected trajectory. We can also mention that engineering resilience can be seen almost as the horizontal vision of this surface, and the ecological resilience Remember, engineering resilience is about the time that you need, and ecological resilience is about the load of disruption that you can cope with. So I will talk after this introduction about the global general historical vision of resilience. I will use these 3 steps. I will talk about instability, the response to instability, and then try to gather these ideas and bring them into the frame of what is resilience and how we can use resilience in the domain of supply chain. So let's start with instability. So the first thing is that instinctively we all have the feeling that in supply chain we move from very local network to regional network to global networks, whatever the type of product we're considering. That can be energy, goods, people's information, and basically this brought the world to be smaller and more global. Of course, the important idea behind that is that instability is the norm. It's a little bit vain to expect to remain stable in nowadays environment, nowadays economical system. It's probably more accurate to expect to try to benefit from the instability. It's a different mindset that is important also to have in mind. The idea behind that is that there is no more absorption space. That means that in the past, a disruption somewhere in the world could be absorbed by the size, the dimension of the world. Now everything is so connected that there is no more absorption space. So that's why instability is the norm. More precisely, the exponential growth of demography has a lot of consequences. So that means that everything that depends on the demography, on the number of people on Earth, are strongly impacted by the way the global population is growing. For instance, we can say that the density, of course, is depending on the exponential growth. Innovation, at least if we believe that more brains means more innovation, and of course the needs. So that's these 3 first aspects that are the direct connection to demography, but then we can combine them. And we can say, okay, the fact that having a very high density and a lot of innovation brings better connection. We have improved a lot in terms of telecommunication and networks, I mean, information networks and that kind of thing. On the other hand, innovation and needs also, of course, increase also the consumption. And finally, we can say that high density, high connection, high consumption brings a very strong dynamics, fast kinetics in how we are consuming, because the density and the connection makes it closer. I mean, now it's easy to order something and have it delivered in the afternoon. So it's all this need, this connection and density strongly increase the kinetics in the domain of supply chain. So that means that we have these 3 strong aspect, that is the exponential density, exponential connection, and exponential kinetics, that are strongly impacting the instability, that are strongly the root causes of why do we have this instability that I mentioned before. That means that because of these 3, the high density, high connection, and high dynamics, high kinetics, if we consider supply and abstract supply and logistic networks, we will have disruptions, and there have always been disruption. The thing is that now, because of the density, the connection, and the kinetics, there are 3 more information that we need to take into account. Is that any disruption will first propagate. I mentioned that before, but because of the high density and high connection, it will propagate. Second thing is also that this disruption can combine, because there is more and more disruption, more and more nodes of our supply networks where they can collide, and that will create combination. And of course, we have a higher frequency also of disruptions. So what are the takeaways from this very abstract and high level simple analysis is that density, connection, and kinetics increasing change the way we need to deal with disruption, because these disruption now are really having these three characteristics of high propagation, high combination, and high frequency. And if we observe from the perspective of the supply and logistic networks, all this perturbation, all the disruptions, of course, have a consequence on the way I can observe the performance of the system of the supply chain of the logistics network that I'm observing. So basically, that's what I wanted to introduce in terms of instability, the cause of instability, the consequence of instability, and how we can observe this instability by observing the performance of the system. So now what can we do? What can be done if we want to respond to this instability? What are the options that we have? The options that we have are mainly inherited from the crisis management domain. And crisis management is often described according to these steps, which are preparation, prevention, response, and recovery. How can we describe these steps? We can say that preparation is about, it's in advance of any crisis. It's about preparing, saving, and regenerating measures so that these measures could be ready, the saving measures for the response and the regenerating measures ready for the recovery. On the other hand, we also have the prevention, and the prevention is about creating, resisting, avoiding, and blocking measures, but also implementing these measures. And finally, in case of any disruption, any crisis situation, then we will implement the saving measures. And as soon as the system is back to a normal situation, we will implement the regenerating measures. If I give you a very simple example, the fact that we cannot drive a car without any driver license, the fact that there are road lights, how you call that, traffic lights, the fact that there are signs on the road and so on. These are the prevention measures. That's optimistic, that trying to avoid the crisis to actually occur. But the fact that we have to put the safety belt, the fact that we have airbags, the fact that the body of the cars will absorb the shock and is built to absorb the shock, these are preparation measures. And these are short-term preparation measures in case of an accident. But the fact that we also have firefighters, the fact that we have emergency medical units, hospitals, all of this is also part of the preparation, and that's the measure that we are preparing in case of any accident. So that means that if I have a car accident, then my airbags will blow, my safety belt will keep me safe on my seat, the body of my car will crash, and the firefighters or the emergency medical service will come as soon as possible, will take me out of the car, and as soon as the car is not on the road anymore, the traffic goes again, and I'm evacuated towards to the hospital, then we have finished the response. And you see that the response has been made based on prepared measures. And after that, we move to the recovery, where the insurance will have to take care of my car. The medical doctor will have to help me to recover from the potential injuries and that kind of thing. So that's this idea. But the thing that is important with this, is that as I said before, the kinetics are too fast to run in cycles. That's okay when we consider big environmental crises like earthquake or natural disasters. But if we talk about everyday life of a supply chain, we cannot run that cycle anymore because the kinetics are too fast. What we have to do, it's another approach. This approach is about this management column that you see here. That means that we have to collect data, that's the bottom layers, be sure that we have data sources that can be sensors, that can be news, that can be websites, that can be communication with our drivers, customers, suppliers. And that's this data that we have to understand and give them sense, make them make sense to this data so that we have an information layer about our situation. And based on this information layer that is as covering and as exhaustive as possible, we can take decision. And these decisions, of course, should be implemented as action. And all of these will be fed by our knowledge and our experience and potential complementary tools. And by doing this, we can constantly run the prevention, preparation, response, and recovery on all the small, big, medium disruption that we are facing at the same time. That's really the idea behind that. And if I want to illustrate that a little bit, that's exactly what a boxer will do. He needs to use his eyes, his ears to understand what his opponent is doing, and he needs to analyze what this movement means, so that it can understand the situation and the will of the opponent, select the appropriate move. Is that step back? Is that launch a punch? Is that protect the body or the face? And he has to implement these moves. So that's exactly the same process, except, and the thing that is interesting with the boxer is that there is a lot of, we can understand that there are also the question of, are we doing that at the right speed? Because if you move too slow, you will still be hit by the fist in your face. Even if you saw it, even if you said, oh, this fist is coming to my face, even if you say I should step back, but if you don't do that fast enough, you will be punched. So we need to take care of we need to consider the time. We also need to consider the accuracy, because you can say, no, that's good. This fist will not hit my head, or it will go for my stomach, and actually it's going to your face. So you also have to be relevant into your at each level. And something that is interesting also, if I consider the boxer, is that these 4 levels has to be crossed at the scale of the fight, during the fight, but also when he sits after each round, maybe he has to think about, okay, what should I change? What should I do? So based on the data that he has, the information that he can retrieve and take decision and implement, maybe he should go more for the body than for the head, or maybe stay back and just think about counterattacks. But also at the scale of the whole career, should I train differently? Should I accept different kind of fight against different kind of opponents? So we got the same thing when we consider the resilience and the agility of the supply chain. We have different time scales, and we also have to deal with the relevance and the speed that we are having. So if I go on with the response to instability, so I said we have to go through data, information, decision, action. But okay, the thing is that if I want to talk about resilience, I need to talk about risks, and I need to talk about disruptions. What are disruptions? What are risks? Disruptions basically are the fact that in your supply chain, you have a lot of stakes that can be your customers, your supplier, your stocks, your transportation, whatever, all of these, that's the stake, the thing that can be your KPI, the thing that you want to protect or that you want to keep safe. The things that they are dangers. Dangers can be single sourcing, danger can be a competitor, danger can be tax rate that change at the border, or that kind of thing. And what you have to understand is that some of your stakes are susceptible to some of these dangers. Some are not, but some are. That means that in this context, you have to identify which one is susceptible. And once you know which of these stakes are susceptible to which danger, then you also have to decide or define what are the conditions that may trigger this risk. That means that in which circumstances will the danger applied to the stake become something that is an actual damage. If you have a seismic area, that's a danger. If you have a city there, then this city is susceptible to this seismic area. that means that there is a risk. And of course, if the tectonic plates are sliding on each other, then you have the condition, the event that will trigger the risk and make your city damaged by this risk that actually occurs. And this notion can be illustrated with this picture that we need to understand from the perspective of supply chain. You have dangers, you have stake, and that's because you have a stake susceptible to a danger that you have risk. Keep in mind that a danger with no stake susceptible, there is no risk. A seismic area with absolutely no one living there, no goods, no stake, there is no risk. It's just a dangerous place to be, but there is no risk. So the risk is really the projection of a danger on a susceptible stake. Then if there is the triggering event, the condition that makes this risk actually occurs, then you get the damage. That's the causal chain. And something that is interesting is that this damage may also trigger another risk or may make a stake susceptible to a danger or create a new danger. A building that has been impacted by an earthquake can now be fragilized and more open and more susceptible to robberies, for example. So that means that we also have not only a causal chain, but also a propagation chain. And this abstract model, again, it's a very simple and abstract vision. It's also something that we need to consider when we are talking about resilience, because that means that we have to identify for our supply chain what are the dangers, what are our stakes, what are the risks, what can be the triggers, and what are the damage. But we need to, if I come back to the idea of a very classical vision of risk, where we talk about probability and impact, we still have, it's completely compliant. The probability is the probability of the trigger, and the impact is how you assess and how you foresee the damage. So we still have exactly the same vision. It's just more complete, and you will see that it's also more easy when we talk about risk management. So of course, I just presented the negative vision of risk, but we can have the exact same vision for opportunity. But instead of a danger, you have a favorability that the stake is susceptible to. That can be one of your customer that is interested in this or that. That's a favorability. If you are selling this product, then it creates an opportunity for you. And if you sign a contract or if you discuss, then that makes benefit. And we can have a neutral vision where we will consider that dangers and favorabilities can be considered as potential, risks and opportunities can be considered as potentiality, and benefits and damage can be considered as actualities. So now that once I said that, I want to show you that this kind of abstract vision is a way for you or for everybody to understand your risky environment, to work on the resilience of your system. That means that if you are able to understand your environment with this concept and say, okay, I understand what are the dangers around me? What are my stakes that are susceptible to these dangers? So what are the risks and how this risk can be triggered and what could be the damage? Then I can start working on risk management. And how can I do that? The first thing that I can mention is that if you want to do prevention, so remember, prevention is trying to avoid the risk to actually occur. I actually have 3 ways of doing prevention. And normally when we talk about prevention, it's a little bit fuzzy. It's just what can we do so that this risk does not occur? Actually, it's very simple. You have 3 ways. The first one is you can remove the danger. Let me give you a very simple example. Let's say I'm doing a barbecue in my yard and I have my kids around. The barbecue creates a high temperature spot. That high temperature spot is a danger. And my kids are susceptible to this danger. If they touch the barbecue, so there's a risk of getting burned. And if they touch the barbecue, then they will their skin will get burned. If I just turn off the barbecue, or if I don't do barbecue anymore, if I sell my barbecue, I'm removing the danger. That's what we do when we put a knife in a high shelf so that the kids cannot grab them. But that's exactly the same thing here. I'm removing the danger. The danger is away. There will be no danger anymore. So my kids can be susceptible to any high temperature. There is no more high temperature. That's the first option, removing the danger. Second one is protecting the danger, making the danger not susceptible making the stakes, not susceptible to the danger anymore. I can ask my kids to go in the yard only with fireproof equipment. Oh, that's weird, but that's an option to make my kids not susceptible to the hotspot, to the barbecue anymore, to the high temperature of the barbecue anymore. And the third option is to prevent the trigger to actually occur. I can put a fence around my barbecue so that the kids will never be able to touch it. I can also talk to them and teach them that they should not go close to the barbecue. And of course, I can try to use all of these three actions all together. I can select one. I can see that, for example, if I come back to the seismic area where I want to build a city, if I want to build buildings, I cannot remove the danger. I cannot put concrete or whatever that will prevent the tectonic plate to slide on each other. So I cannot do anything against the danger. Danger is here. Can I protect the stake? Yes, I can probably put them on, I don't know, you said that, but shock absorber so that they are anti-seismic buildings. And even if the trigger actually occurs, my buildings are not susceptible anymore to this danger. So sometimes I have a choice to do between these options. And sometimes I don't want to do prevention. Then I need to do response. And response is only about dealing with the damage and trying to find benefit that will compensate the damage. If my kids touch the barbecue, then I hope I have a healing cream somewhere in my house that I can put on their skin, and that will make them feel better, and that will somehow compensate the damage. So I have all these options: removing the danger, protecting the stakes, preventing the triggers, and compensating the damage. That are my options for all the risks that I have in order to make my system resilient. So that means that basically, and that's the last thing I want to say about that, is that I need to find the causal chain that will remove the danger, or the causal chain that will protect the stake. I need to have this fireproof combination in my house, or the causal chain that will prevent the trigger. I need to build a fence, or I need to spend time with my kids explaining, showing them how hot is the barbecue, or I need to buy some healing cream, put it somewhere that I can access, and I know where it is in my house, and I need to apply it on my kid's skin. So it's always a question of finding the right chain and triggering the right chain to prevent or to respond to any kind of crisis situation. So now let me move to resilience and what I want to say about resilience. So now we have in mind that, okay, the environment of our supply chain is unstable. We know why it's unstable, or the root causes of instability. We know how this instability creates risks, and how this risk can be modeled as causal chain. And we know that if we want to deal with this causal chain, then we need to be able to create some, let's say, a counterforce causal chain that will be able to remove the danger, protect the stake, prevent the trigger, or compensate the damage. So how do we link that with resilience? Resilience, I come back to the initial definition. You remember about the performance asymptote. There can be a tolerance area, and basically what we observe is that if the performance somehow drop below the tolerance area, then that's in this area that we are in a crisis situation, or at least we are not in the right situation, and that's where we will observe the resilience. Basically, often we talk about acceptable duration to say that the system is resilient, is that it comes back to the expected trajectory, but within a time that it's, remember the engineering resilience, so within a time that it's acceptable. The drawback of this is that it's a posteriori vision of resilience. We can observe that after the disruption, and we can say, okay, we were good, we came back correctly. So what I want to share with you today is a more live vision of resilience. And how can we define it? And I will try to explain that. So we still have our performance, the way we observe the performance of our system, and the tolerance area. And we still have the area where the system is not meeting anymore the expected performance. We have the prevention, preparation phase, response phase, recovery phase, and all of these things. What I want to define is the robustness area. The robustness area is robustness is the the ability to respond to disruption with planned measures, with things that have been defined in advance. And it's very important because that's what I've shown before when I said, I have my healing cream in my house because I know that some kids, I have a party with kids and a barbecue, some kids may get burned. So I bought a healing cream in advance. That's robustness because I planned that. I'm ready to face this disruption. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is the flexibility area. It's not planned, but I have enough resource, I have enough flexibility in the way I understand the situation to create something to respond to the situation that I'm facing. And basically, I can also add the fragility area. That's the place where I don't know if I will be able to respond. And the breaking area, I know that I will not be able to respond. But what is important here is that the resilience is robustness and flexibility. That's the combination of everything that you have planned to respond to any disruption, plus your ability to improvise and to do something that will still respond to the disruption. So if I zoom a little bit here in this disruption area, the light green is where I perform the planned measures, and the dark green is where I perform the unplanned measures, and both abilities should be combined to define my resilience. And some supply chains, some systems want to strongly increase the robustness, plan a lot of measures, and we don't care about the flexibility because we think that we're strong enough with the robustness. Some other supply chain may say, okay, robustness is not that good, but we know that we have enough resource, that we have enough degrees of liberty to make decision that will make us very flexible and that will provide us with this resilience. Something that we'll discuss during the course is also measuring the resilience over the performance or over the capability. Let me give you a very simple example to tell you why it's important. If I'm observing one of my friends, let's say Chris, for example, running a marathon, because Chris has run something like 20 marathon, I think, in his life already. So if I'm observing and monitoring Chris' performance, if at some point I see that it dropped from 5 minutes per kilometer to 5 minutes 45, I could be worried. I'm observing the performance only. But if it's because he was injured, or if it's because he just had a break to drink and to eat some orange, then that's different. But still, by only observing the performance, I will see the same thing. So observing the resilience only by looking at the performance is not the best and only angle. You should also consider the capability, because if I'm now observing Chris' capability by drinking and eating some fruit, is increasing his capability. He's probably making the next kilometers easier. While of course, if he's injured, then he lost a lot of capability. So that's why we'll discuss also that during the course. Basically, as I said, resilience is robustness and flexibility, what has been planned and what can be improvised. So how can we improve resilience of our supply chain? What can we do? We have two options. We can improve robustness or we can improve flexibility. We have also to be careful because by improving one, we may decrease the other one. So we also have to find a good trade-off and a good compromise. Making your system more and more robust may make it less flexible. And on the other hand, improving the flexibility make it less robust. And we also don't want to reduce the efficiency or the effectiveness of our system in terms of performing its mission. But as I said, improving robustness is about prevention and preparation, and flexibility is about improvisation and reallocation. So let's look at both of these avenues. Improving robustness. What can we do? The thing that we need to do, as I said, is prevention and preparation. So we can use this model of risk modeling, and we can make a risk analysis. Identify, not exhaustively, not completely, but at least the risk that we can identify, we will identify them, and we will model them. And by identifying as much as we can, based on this, define some preventive measures. That means some measures that we can deploy and that will prevent the risk to occur, or at least minimize its impact. Or we can also identify some preparation measures. That means measures that we only deploy if the risk actually occurs and that are supposed to compensate this risk. So this analysis, it's a very simple vision of what management risk is and risk management of risk is, or risk management. But it's still, identifying the preventive measures and identifying the preparation measures is the first option. So now what we have is a set of risks that have been identified, a set of preventive measures related to some of this risk, and a set of corrective measures that are related to some of this risk. How can we decide which one we need to prepare or which one we need to implement when, and all of these things? So the options and the vision that we have here is that let's based on this very simple example, we can say, okay, on my supply chain, I have a shortage of raw material X. That's my first risk. That's because on my supply chain, I have monosourcing with supplier A of this raw material. And of course, if there is any issue with this supplier, then so there is a risk of lack of raw material. And if there is any issue with supplier A, then I will get an issue with my stock of raw material X. The second risk is an unsatisfied demand. So again, my supply chain, there is a danger. There may be a danger because I have a poor forecast. My forecast is not very accurate. It's been done very fastly, or I'm not very happy with my forecast. So I know that they may create there is a risk of misjudged demand. I can have a wrong estimation of the demand. And of course, if there is an order that is well different, I mean, above or over my forecast, then of course, I may not be able to satisfy this demand. So these are my two risks that I've identified. And what I can do now is that I can identify some preventive and corrective measures. Of course, I can multi-source this raw material X. That's a preventive action. But maybe this other supplier is way more expensive, so it will impact my performance. I can also do the multi-sourcing in case. I can just be ready and prepare with some I know some palliative supplier that I can trigger at any moment if there's an issue. So this time it's a corrective measure. For my second risk, I can try to get a better forecast. It's preventive. It will cost me some money because I will probably have to deal with a consulting company to make a better forecast, or spend some time with some of my employees to do that. But that's something I can do. I can also try to communicate with my customer to avoid any surprised order. And finally, I can know some of my competitors to which I can buy some of the product that may be that I may miss. So I have 3 preventive measures, 2 corrective measures. So I need to decide which one I should choose. So to explain that, so I have my 3 preventive measures, my 2 corrective measures, and I have my expected performance baseline according to the next months. So what I need to observe is that for the preventive measures are they effective? What are their price? But also, how do they impact my performance baseline if the risk does not occur? Because that would be very, very bad if I deploy a preventive measure that strongly impact my performance because it cost me a lot and the risk never occurs. So I have to find a good compromise for that. And the corrective measures, I have to observe the cost and their efficiency. So that means that if I keep my example, I have this performance for no disruption. I have this disruption, this performance curve if there is no disruption, but I still implement my preventive measures. You see, my performance is less good and it cost me. So I need to see what it looks like. Same here. I need to observe what is the performance if the disruption actually occurs, but there is no measures. This time it cost me nothing, but I need to understand the consequences. I can also observe if there is the disruption, are my preventive measures efficient? It cost me, but at least it's efficient. I can also check what would the corrective measures do if if I deploy them and if I implement them right after the disruption actually occurs. And of course, I can combine all my preventive measures with my corrective measures. It will cost me quite a lot, but that's probably the option, the safest in terms of performance, not in terms of cost and revenue. So by observing all of these, I can decide which preventive measures should be applied or not, because they're impacting too much my performance if there is no risk. But if the risk is very probable, then I still should consider them. Are my corrective measures enough? If my corrective measures are enough, I just keep my corrective measures. Or is the disruption with a low impact? That's everything that I should combine to make my decision. So now if I go to the second aspect, improving flexibility. If I want to improve flexibility, there are two main factors that we have to keep in mind. The first one is we need to have free capability. That means that we should try to avoid being 100% occupied resource in a 100% occupied resource configuration, because else that means that in case of any disruption, we'll have to remove resource from things that they are doing to contribute to the management of the disruption. We also have to be able to reallocate resources on the fly. That means that we need to be sure that resources can perform the new task that we'll allocate them. We need to be sure that we have multi-skilled resource. So that's easy to say, but basically we need to understand that the consequence of that is that a highly optimized organization may be very robust because we have defined a lot of measures and we know that we have the resource to deploy them. But as soon as disruption falls out of the perimeter of the identified risks, then we are not flexible and that's not resilient. On the other hand, the organization with highly specialized resource may be effective and efficient, but not flexible, because we have resources that are only able to do very well one thing. You can see that in sport as well. If you have a team with very specialized players, as soon as there is a disruption, someone is hurt, a player is injured, or the strategy of the other team is very weird, that kind of thing, then the very specialized team cannot adapt to this. But they are very effective and efficient because they are very specialized. So we need to, if we want to be resilient in terms of flexibility, we have to control the load rate and decide if we want to optimize the load rate at the maximum so that we use our resource, but we have less flexibility. And we also have to favor a multi-skilled resource and partners in case of any disruption. So it's a compromise between efficiency and flexibility. So the takeaways, if we want to improve resilience, it's improving robustness and flexibility. And for the robustness, we have to identify the risks. For the flexibility, we have to map our partners and internal resources. To improve resource, we have to define preventive and corrective measures. If we want to improve flexibility, we have to analyze the workload of this resource and their skills. Do they have various skills? And we have to define robustness plan and flexibility plan. Robustness plan means we have to define what are the preventive measures that we'll implement in any case. What are the corrective measures that we'll deploy in case of this or that to occur? That's a choice. That's our robustness plan, so that we are ready in case of any of the identified disruption actually occurs. Either we have already a preventive measure that has been deployed, either we have a corrective measure that is ready to be deployed, either both. And in case we're not in the frame of this identified disruption, then by knowing the workload of our resource and partners, by knowing their skills, then we can deploy and create on-the-fly improvised measures, but we have flexibility because we can choose some available resource and we can choose among a wide spectrum of capabilities. So I'm almost done. Here's the conclusion. So from what I just said about how can we improve resilience, we have to, that means that we need to be able to continuously monitor the risks and the capabilities of our system. That means that continuously we need to update the risk that we have identified and continuously update the map of capabilities that we have to be able to react. So thanks a lot. I don't know if Chris or Sean wants to comment on this, but these are the next course that will be delivered on supply and demand planning first, and on the next gen courses here. So I will just, so that if anyone needs to see that for the supply and demand planning and for the next gen courses. We also have the next lunch and learn by Professor Mathieu Loras on let's say modern supply chain fundamentals and different vision of risk-driven, data-driven, demand-driven, hyper-connected, and all of these things. Thanks a lot. And if anybody has any question, I'm now ready to deal with questions.
Thank you, Fred. I do know we got some questions in advance, and while we're waiting, I'll comment on at least one of them, and then we'll get Wendy's question. So I'll do one, and then we'll use Wendy's question. So the first question was, an example like the Panama Canal. Last summer, we saw the acute issues of there being water level issues that limited the volume of crossings. So it's different than the issue we've had in the Red Sea. The Red Sea is at risk now due to not being a safe passage. And so one is something that is a bit more predictable than the other, right? I mean, the reality for us in the business, and I asked one of the grad students before we got on, we have a monitor of current performance in the Panama Canal. It's open source, so you could get it. We obviously know last year it was a function of rain. And so it is something that can be measured. And so it is a known risk. And as we see, there are preventive measures that can be taken. Obviously, in the Suez, it was a extremely different situation because customers completely changed their freight flow, and obviously the shipping lines did the same. And so now you've got the option of going around the Cape of Good Hope, and in your countermeasure, you've got to start allocating additional inventory to deal with the increased cycle time. So there are a very practical set of steps that you can do once something like the Suez Canal happens. And with Panama, it really is a matter of getting all the best information, understanding, the reality is different steamship lines get different priorities and different slots through there and are willing to pay when the price goes up. And so it has one degree of impact for people on the high end and a bigger degree of impact on people who aren't willing to pay. But it can be measured and modeled. As an example, as I think about, Fred, that's a risk where we can take measures and implement them. We can also understand how much it impacts our business based on freight that flows there. So it can be part of a formal process. So I'll pause on that one. And then I want to ask Wendy's question. And thank you, Wendy. And the question is, Fred, very informative. Can you comment on how to map your partners? Supply chain visibility and risk assessment is challenging beyond tier 1 for various reasons. And I will, Fred, you and I can go back and forth on that.
Okay, and I understand it's always a question. It might be complicated to map your supply chain, and especially going through the different tiers. But it's never a useless effort. That's mainly the point that I want here. Partial knowledge is better than no knowledge. So by knowing what your suppliers and the suppliers of your suppliers I mean, I know a lot of big companies in Europe that only take a supplier if it's able to provide them with the map of its own suppliers and until rank 3 or 4, that kind of things. So by knowing this by building a live and maintained picture of this network, then each node becomes a set of capabilities and flexibility potential. So I know I'm not really answering your question, Wendy. I'm not saying how I'm more explaining why you should do it than how you should do it. But that's also something that we'll discuss during the course. But my main comment is we need to do that, and we need to find options with our partners to not oblige, but collaborate in the way we know each other and are not just black box to each others. And that's what information and database supply chain are, or that data-driven supply chain are based on. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything on this.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sorry,
would add
Wendy,
it.
I'm not answering very precisely,
Yep,
but that's what I can.
that's okay. I think Fred hits it right. We're going to go into this will be part of what we do in the working session in the class. Is offer tactics around this. But I think the way I think about it is you've really got to understand your supply base from a segmentation standpoint first. And you've got to understand where you have, in particular, bottleneck suppliers, where you've got, suppliers where you don't have a lot of options in the market. So you've got to go through some segmentation to say, where is the effort to go beyond tier one merited to a greater degree? And it may be in your bottleneck suppliers when you don't have a lot of flexibility and alternate supply. So then you've got to go within that supply base. I do agree with Fred that we generally believe that the challenges around resiliency are mid to long term. So if you don't currently have in your supplier practices and your supplier contracting agreements the visibility of the beyond tier, at least for resilience, a lot of suppliers don't want to share that from a competitive standpoint. But if you can make the case there, I think that's part of what you want to do contractually. I think it's in your supplier relationship management and your supplier performance management to try to encourage that. To the extent that you get to a dead end there, in my experience, then we at Coke did some external crowdsourcing. We understood the bill of materials. So we at least understood where they were going to go, geography, and we then engaged with some external resources to try to get a sense of it. It may be through industry associations, or now we've got a lot of partners who play in this space and try to provide visibility information. So Wendy, hopefully that gives you some further thought. And if you want to talk more about potentially leveraging the class, we're happy to do that as well. Okay. Thank you, Wendy. I don't see any other. I see one in the Q&A box, and it's from Amarth. And it said, for a highly engineering industry, it is different to choose only top ranked supplier as everything is low volume. Building resilience is having as many backup suppliers as possible. And I think, to the extent, I mean, I would say the opposite of the extreme is single source, right? If you've got single source, then you've got to work on secondary and tertiary sourcing. In many cases, two is not much better than one. I think to the question that's asked, ideally, you would like as many backup suppliers as possible. In some cases, if you've got tight specs or a particular product in your bill of material, it is a challenge. I do think in general, the trend that I've seen in a lot of the folks that I look in industry is really saying we need to accept some increased complexity in our supply base by having more alternatives. But you've also got to invest then in understanding the market and deciding where you're going to go to the effort to get incremental suppliers into your network to defray that risk. When assessing risk, are you looking at the products and service itself or the supplier or both? And I think the answer is we have to look at both. I think it's all a function of our business and where the risk lies, but I think we have to look at both. In terms of practical recommendations, we've got a lot of tools that we'll demonstrate in our class. Apologies for the volume behind me. I am going to try to hit Clay's question because we're going to get close on time. In the defense sector, we've seen a significant response for increasing manufacturing volumes to the needs of our allies. For example, the artillery, but we still need to backfill our own stockpiles. It involves maxing out current production as well as building entirely new facilities in the defense sector. I think he's got that twice. And
how do you recommend?
How do you recommend increasing resiliency when the demand signal may not be clear in the future? So I think it's a great long question, Clay, and I think it definitely gets to a strategic discussion. I think the artillery is a particular example where there is you've got to go through your scenario modeling and simulation of what you think the future state will look like. I think at minimum, you understand what you've got to do to build back all of that buffer inventory that's been blown out, and you can predict the amount of time and how much manufacturing capacity that will consume. That gives you time in that window in terms of how can you make a longer term commitment and a longer term strategic commitment to that source of supply. I think in that particular case, you've also got to understand where the art of war is going and what's the long-term need for that capability. So that's a really specific and complicated exercise, but it's what's required given what's going on. And then Wendy's last question. I think, Wendy, to your point, I'll make you a deal. You can send us a note offline and we'll take a call with you. And Clay, if you want to follow up, we'll do the same and roll up our sleeves, and hopefully we can convince you to come take the course with us. Okay, we are 1 minute over, and I do want, Fred, if you go to those course listings real quick, I'll plug them and then we'll wrap and say thank you. We do have classes coming up. Our May class is on supply chain risk and resilience, so it's timely. And you can see, as Sean said, our other courses. We are going to run the supply chain risk and resilience class twice in both the spring and the fall, as well as our world-class sales and ops planning. And then the other course I want to plug, the other two courses in our next gen. All this work here is coming out of our research. We've got our Gen AI class that's going to run May 26th. That'll be virtual, or you can join us live in Atlanta. Fred mentioned the modern supply chain overview. We've got some nice kind of clips of that out on social media. If you want to get a sense of that one, it's going to be fabulous. And then we will run the Gen AI class again in the fall, both virtual and on our Savannah campus. And I think the last thing Andy had was make sure you sign up for our next webinar in April. I'm not sure if you had that, Fred, in your next slide. There it is. Well, Fred, another great webinar. Thank you so much. And thank you to the team. Please join us next month when Matthew will be our guest. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.